We're about halfway through the college basketball season, and I think it's fair to start asking some questions about some Kentucky basketball players. Like, what on earth has happened to Justin Edwards?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more, and right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when they place a $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we're going to be having a conversation about Kentucky basketball forward Justin Edwards. Has he lived up to expectations this year? So far, I would say no. Going to break down why in just a second. Also on today's episode, going to talk a little bit about something we discussed in the recap episode of the South Carolina game. How often does a title contender get beaten like they did, like the Wildcats did against USC? There's actually a good answer for this thanks to KSR. We're going to talk about that later on in the show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all different platforms. So if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, wherever you may be tuned in, subscribe to the show. It's going to be a fun back half of the season. I want to talk a little bit here today about something that may be a little bit more of a negative conversation, but also I think that there is a positive side to it, at least one arriving very soon. Justin Edwards, the five-star prospect out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was rated as the number 3 player overall in the 2023 class. He committed to the Wildcats in July of 2022. Number 1 small forward, number 1 player in the state of Pennsylvania, projected as a lottery pick, if not the best player in this year's upcoming draft. Those projections have seemingly shattered and disappeared across the board. Justin Edwards so far this season has statistically not lived up to the hype, and whenever you watch his film and break down what he's done for the Wildcats, I would argue that it does not help his case at all. In fact, I think it makes it even worse. So what's going on with Justin Edwards? Well, before we break down what has happened, I want to kind of talk about what we said all the way back in 2022. I did an episode breaking down the commitment of Edwards and what were the things that we noted about him coming out of high school. He's a versatile scorer that is an all-around type of player that can get the things done in multiple different ways. He can facilitate the ball. He can handle it a little bit. He can shoot as well. He's a triple threat when it comes to scoring. He can score at the rim, he can score in the mid-range, and again, like I mentioned, from outside the arc. He also plays really good defense. I said in that 2022 episode, hey, I think his defense may actually be the best attribute of his game. But if we're looking at what he does best on offense, he gets out and runs well in transition and can score at the rim, got great hands. And I said that when he was forced in high school, particularly at Peach Jam, to do things offensively at a higher rate than he normally does, so a higher volume, whenever he was forced to take more shots, he was a less efficient player. I think most people, if they continue to jack up shots, they're not going to be particularly efficient unless they're just having a really good game. But with Edwards, it was interesting. He only shot 43% from the floor during that Peach Jam, struggled whenever the ball was continuing to be fed to him. And I said, that doesn't matter. He's going to be a more efficient player for Kentucky because he's going to fit into a system with a bunch of other talented wings and guards where he doesn't have to be the primary scorer. He doesn't have to be the number 1 guy. And that is proven to be true. Everything else about Justin Edwards so far this season has been a work in progress. Edwards so far has really struggled to shoot the basketball, shooting right now 28.9% from beyond the arc. And we know how some of Kentucky's guys struggled to shoot at the beginning of the season. DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards were the 2 notable ones. Wagner is actually up to 32% from deep, and so Edwards is kind of sitting there alone as the only player on the roster who has made a three-point attempt in this rotation shooting underneath 30%. Adu Thiero, Aaron Bradshaw both shooting right at 30%, in case you were curious about that. Overall, though, from the floor, 45.8%, averaging 8.1 points per game, and 4 rebounds a game, less than an assist, a steal, a block per contest, and in the other major statistical categories. It has not been the type of season that we expected from Edwards. He has taken a back seat to some of these other really talented guards and wings, but when given touches, when given the opportunity, I don't really understand what is going on with his offensive game. Cal continues to say that he has confidence in Edwards. He's telling the kid himself that. He's telling him to do more things with the ball in his hands. He's telling him to be more confident and more aggressive. And too many times this season, I think we've seen Edwards be timid with the basketball and lack aggression going to the cup. And there have been flashes where you will see, hey, look, there goes Justin Edwards sprinting down the lane to get an easy bucket, or contorts his body to make an impressive finish at the rim. Why don't we see him get those opportunities more? Well, obviously, because you have Reeves, Dillingham, Mitchell, Wagner, Reed Shepherd, other guys on this roster that score very well for you. But also, whenever he does get the ball, he's not even taking advantage of opportunities where he could try and make something happen. And in transition, one of the biggest strengths of his game, I think, coming out of high school, he's really become lackluster. I would say he's failed to finish layups. Him trying to dunk standing at the rim has been a huge problem this season. I think he's gotten stuffed by the rim 4 or 5 times, to the point where people online, including myself, are like, how does this keep happening? Just lay the ball in or dunk it. There has been, I think, a shattering of confidence when it comes to Edwards' game. At least that's what it looks like to me. I may be completely wrong on that. But in high school, he was a really good offensive player. He could do so many different things well. And defensively, I thought he was even better. But on defense, we've seen at times this season him get out of sync, as has this entire team at different points. But every single aspect of his game, I think, other than the amount that we would get to see his game, has not lived up to expectation. It's been incredibly disappointing. And so I'm just sitting here wondering, will we get to see Justin Edwards shine? Will we get to see him take over a game like he was projected to coming out of high school? And this is not something where we can just say, oh, well, he was never going to be a 13 to 15 point per game scorer coming into Kentucky or coming into college. He was never going to be this, that, or the other. This kid was projected by some outlets to be the number 1 pick in the 2024 NBA draft. He was supposed to be something. And so far this year, he's not been able to live up to the hype. In fact, he is, I think, really underwhelmed from a statistical perspective. Does he have the talent in him? Absolutely. I think that Justin Edwards is still one of the most talented players on this roster. I think versatility is one of the big names of his game. He can absolutely do a ton of different things for Kentucky. He just needs to show more efficiency, and he just needs to take control. And I think he's got the ability to do it. I just don't know when that's going to come. So I trust Edwards at some point will figure it out. If not this year, maybe next year. But as of today, halfway through the year, he's not met the expectations. Maybe they were placed on him incorrectly. Maybe we're looking at a situation where things have been all stacked up against him, and he has just it wasn't fair to do that to him, and he's just not able to live up to unrealistic expectations. Maybe that's the case here. But regardless, the number 1 player at his position coming out of high school has not been the star-studded freshman that we thought he would be. Maybe he takes matters into his own hands here towards the latter half of this schedule. If you've got any thoughts on Justin Edwards, if he's going to be able to pull out of the slump that he is in, if he's going to be able to prove that he is one of the more dominant players on this roster, I think he's got it in him. You can leave that in the YouTube comments below or hit me on the socials at LockedOnUK. All right. How often does a title contender get beaten as badly as Kentucky did against South Carolina? Well, actually, it happens every now and then, and Kentucky specifically has seen this before. Before I dive into that, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you making Locked On Kentucky your first listen. If you've not subscribed on either the YouTube channel or whatever podcast feed you are tuned in on, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening today. By the way, let me know what you think about Justin Edwards in the comments below, and let me know what you think about this right here. So Kentucky got whipped by South Carolina the other night. Just absolutely demolished in the second half. Could not keep up on the offensive or defensive end of the floor. It was embarrassing. And so a question that we had in the recap episode was, well, how often does a title contender get defeated like Kentucky did in a given season? And KSR actually accepted this challenge and shared some information in an article written by Jack Pilgrim just a couple of days ago. Good news and bad news, according to Pilgrim. You can check this out over at KSR.com. Just head over to On3. Look for the Kentucky team page as well. You could do that. But Pilgrim goes to break down good news and bad news about how there are so many different times in Kentucky history where Kentucky has lost to a non-conference opponent at home, unranked, and to an unranked conference foe by at least 15 points. It's happened 9 times. 7 of those times, Kentucky failed to make the NCAA tournament, and then 2 of those times, Kentucky made the Elite 8, but they had not made the Elite 8 underneath those qualifications since the 1991-92 season. The good news from from KSR, and this is what I want to focus on here, this coming from Corey Price. Kentucky has 17 Final Fours in the program's rich history. Of them, 8 of those teams had regular season losses of at least 15 points. Not quite half, but enough of a sample size to suggest it's not a fluke for this stuff to happen here. That's what Jack Pilgrim had to say. So interesting note there. When Kentucky has had Final Fours in 8 of those seasons, in about half of those seasons, Kentucky got mollywopped by somebody in the middle of the regular season. So you should sit here as a fan and have some confidence that, hey, just because Kentucky lost to South Carolina the other day does not mean that their title hopes are completely shattered. In fact, I said on the show, I think Sean Vinzel of Hoops Insights said online, I saw a couple of other media members say this as well, this doesn't really change the outlook for Kentucky in March. I said that after the South Carolina loss. I said this is not really going to affect how I view Kentucky's chances to win the national championship. We already knew their defense was bad. We already knew that every now and then they will just lay an egg on offense because that's just bound to happen. That's just college basketball. Despite this team scoring about 90 a game, you're going to have contests where things slow down. You also didn't get a great officiated game, and you also got some really physical defense from South Carolina. Props to them, by the way, for playing their brand of basketball and winning a game pretty handily. That's just kind of what happened there. But this does not affect, I think, the trajectory for this team. Now, if they lose 3 or 4 more of these type of games, it'll affect their seeding, which will affect their trajectory. But I don't envision that happening where they get blown out like 4 more times on the road against teams that they shouldn't. I don't think they'll get blown out against Vanderbilt, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi State. At least I hope not. Knock on wood. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Knocked on my mouse pad. Knock on wood there. But the Wildcats are fine. I think that they're in the exact same place. It's just the loss emotionally hurts and kind of makes you worry. The defense needs to improve. Still, that didn't change. The offense is still great. That didn't change. You just had a night where both things didn't go in your favor. So looking forward, what do you have coming up this weekend? You've got a trip to Arkansas against a team that is really struggling to put it together this year. According to Ken Pom, they're one of the, lesser teams in the SEC. I think they've got some good pieces. I think they may be better than some of the analytics say just because of how athletic they are. Going to break that down on tomorrow's episode. Going to have a full preview episode of Kentucky versus Arkansas. That game tipping, by the way, at 5 p.m. This weekend. Make sure you do not miss that because it's another tough road environment. Andrew Stefaniak of Wildcats today, and I identified, hey, out of this next 4-game stretch between South Carolina and Tennessee, Arkansas is the game that scares us the most. So that's going to be tough. But after that, you get a game against Florida, a much better opponent, but it's in Rupp. That's a game you can win. And then you've got the big one against Tennessee at home. Ken Pom only gives Kentucky a 41% chance to win that game. But hey, here's your chance to prove in a big-time game your defense can step up and make some plays. Hopefully it can. Hopefully we'll see that. You've still got chances to show in some of these big moments you can clutch up despite being underwhelming on the defensive end of the ball. I was watching a video earlier, I think it was actually on YouTube, about a guy breaking down, okay, what are the qualifications for a team making the Final Four, winning the national title since 2000. And one of the things that he pointed out was you need to be in the top 37 and 57 on Ken Pom in offensive and defensive adjusted efficiency. That's since 2000, though. So a lot's changed from the games. Lots changed in the game, I would say, in the past 10 years or so. So really we should be looking at maybe a smaller sample size, but I think that's good for just it. I think it's still fine. Kentucky sitting at 97th now, just plummeted out of near the mid 40 range ever since they started conference play. They've got a chance to turn that around still. They've got a chance to rise if they really do start to play better defense, especially at the rim. If they can do that, they'll be good. They'll be good. I think things are fine for Kentucky basketball. Nothing's really changed. And by the way, if I didn't mention it, just circling all the way back to the start of this episode, starting at the conversation that we had about Edwards, when Thiero comes back, I said this yesterday, I'll say it again, I think Thiero should start. I think he should. I think he's the better defensive player. I think he's the more physical player, the better rebounder. And you may say he's not as good of a shooter. Statistically, he's better. Probably very similar if you gave them the same amount of shots, but I think that Thiero should be inserted into the lineup and should stay there more often than Edwards. You get better defense out of him. You get some wins here. Start building some momentum again. At least I'm hoping that's what happens. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Again, want to remind you guys, we're going to have a preview episode of Kentucky versus Arkansas tomorrow. Make sure you don't miss that. Subscribe to the show. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.